What happens when Hollywood's most legendary tough guy meets daytime television's most outspoken host? You're about to witness one of the most explosive confrontations ever caught on camera, where civility crumbles and true colors are revealed in the most unexpected way. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered this massive blow-up. The studio lights were blazing hot that Tuesday afternoon as Clint Eastwood made his way onto the set of The View. At 84 years old, the man still commanded respect wherever he walked, his weathered face carrying decades of Hollywood history. Today was supposed to be a simple promotional appearance for his latest directorial effort, a quiet conversation about filmmaking and legacy. What nobody expected was the verbal warfare that was about to unfold. Whoopi Goldberg sat behind the familiar curved desk, her signature dreadlocks framing a face that seemed unusually tense even before the cameras started rolling. The other co-hosts exchanged nervous glances as Eastwood settled into the guest chair, his movements deliberate and measured as always. Something felt different in the air, an electric tension that the production crew couldn't quite place. "Welcome back to The View," Whoopi began, her voice carrying that familiar authority she wielded like a weapon. "We're here with the legendary Clint Eastwood, director, actor, and apparently someone who has some very interesting opinions about how this country should be run." Eastwood's steel blue eyes narrowed slightly. This wasn't the introduction they had discussed in pre-interview. "Well, Whoopi, I'm here to talk about my film, but I'm always happy to discuss whatever's on your mind." "Oh, I bet you are," Whoopi shot back, leaning forward with an intensity that made the studio audience shift uncomfortably. "Because from what I understand, you've got plenty to say about politics, about social issues, about things that maybe you should think twice before commenting on." The veteran actor's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Anyone who knew Eastwood recognized that particular expression, the calm before the storm. "I've been expressing my opinions for longer than some people have been alive, Whoopi. That's what Americans do. We speak our minds." "Some Americans speak their minds responsibly," Whoopi countered, her voice rising just enough to signal she was ready for battle. "Others just throw around dangerous rhetoric without thinking about the consequences." Eastwood sat back in his chair, his posture still relaxed but his eyes growing colder. "Dangerous rhetoric? That's interesting coming from someone who's made a career out of saying whatever pops into her head, regardless of who it offends or hurts." The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras capturing every second of this unexpected confrontation. The other co-hosts looked like deer caught in headlights, unsure whether to intervene or let this play out. Whoopi's producer was frantically gesturing from the wings, but she seemed oblivious to everything except the man sitting across from her. "Excuse me." Whoopi's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Did you just come onto my show to insult me?" "I came onto your show to have a conversation," Eastwood replied, his voice steady as granite. "But if you want to make this personal, we can certainly go down that road. Though I have to warn you, I've been down roads like this before, and they don't usually end well for the other guy." Whoopi laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that a threat, Clint? Because let me tell you something, this is my house. These are my rules, and I don't take kindly to guests who think they can come in here and intimidate me." "Intimidate you?" Eastwood's eyebrows raised slightly. "Lady, I haven't even started talking yet. But since you seem determined to turn this into something it doesn't need to be, maybe we should address the elephant in the room." "What elephant would that be?" "The fact that you've spent the last 5 minutes trying to pick a fight instead of having an actual conversation. The fact that you ambushed me with accusations instead of treating your guest with basic respect. The fact that you're so busy being angry about everything that you've forgotten how to listen." Whoopi's face flushed. "Don't you dare lecture me about respect. Don't you dare sit in that chair and tell me how to do my job. I've been doing this longer than you think, and I've interviewed people who make you look like an amateur." "Amateur?" Eastwood's voice remained calm, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "That's funny, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the amateur is the one who can't conduct an interview without turning it into a personal attack." The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators were adjusting their shots to capture every micro-expression, every gesture. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing something they knew would be talked about for years to come. "You know what your problem is, Clint," Whoopi leaned forward aggressively. You're from a different era. An era where people like you could say whatever you wanted and never had to answer for it. Well, welcome to the real world, where actions have consequences and words matter. Eastwood's response was measured, each word delivered with surgical precision. My problem, Whoopi, is that I have the audacity to think for myself instead of letting other people tell me what to believe. My problem is that I've lived long enough to see through the kind of manufactured outrage that you're trying to sell. Here today, manufactured outrage. Whoopi's voice cracked with disbelief. You think this is manufactured? You think people's real pain and real struggles are just manufactured for your entertainment? I think, Eastwood said slowly, that you've confused being loud with being right. I think you've confused being angry with being righteous. And I think you've confused attacking your guests with doing good television. The studio audience gasped audibly. This was no longer a celebrity interview. This was a public dismantling happening in real time. Whoopi's co-hosts were frozen, unsure whether to jump in or let this continue to its inevitable conclusion. Whoopi stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. You want to talk about good television? Good television is holding people accountable. Good television is asking the hard questions that other people are afraid to ask. Eastwood remained seated, his calm demeanor in stark contrast to Whoopi's escalating agitation. Good television is also knowing when you've crossed the line from journalism into personal vendetta. Good television is treating your audience with enough intelligence to let them make up their own minds instead of trying to force-feed them your agenda. My agenda. Whoopi's voice was now echoing through the studio. My agenda is standing up for people who don't have a voice. My agenda is calling out hypocrisy wherever I see it. And right now, I'm seeing plenty of it sitting right in that chair. Eastwood finally stood, his full height casting a shadow across the desk. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades in Hollywood, decades of commanding respect through presence rather than volume. Whoopi, I've sat through some difficult interviews in my time. I've dealt with hostile press, difficult directors, and prima donnas of every variety. But I've never encountered someone so determined to make themselves the story instead of doing their job. The studio was electric with tension as these two titans of their respective industries faced off across the desk that had seen countless celebrity interviews, but nothing quite like this. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity as Clint Eastwood and Whoopi Goldberg stared each other down across the desk. The studio audience held their collective breath, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of this Hollywood legend facing off against daytime television's most formidable host. You know what? Whoopi said, her voice trembling with barely contained fury. I think our audience deserves to know exactly who they're looking at. They deserve to know that behind all that tough guy mystique sits someone who thinks his fame gives him the right to dismiss other people's experiences. Eastwood's response was swift and cutting, and I think they deserve better than watching their host have a public meltdown because someone had the nerve to disagree with her. This isn't about my fame, Whoopi. This is about your inability to handle anyone who doesn't bow down to your particular brand of righteousness. Righteousness. Whoopi slammed her hand down on the desk, the sound echoing through the studio like a gunshot. You want to talk about righteousness? Let's talk about using your platform responsibly. Let's talk about the influence you have and how you choose to use it. Eastwood leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper that had intimidated countless actors and directors over the decades. Let's talk about your platform, Whoopi. Let's talk about how you use this show to attack anyone who doesn't share your worldview. Let's talk about how you've turned what should be a conversation into an inquisition. The other co-hosts finally found their voices. One of them tentatively raised her hand. Maybe we should take a quick break and, no, Whoopi snapped without taking her eyes off Eastwood. We're not taking a break. We're going to finish this conversation right here, right now. Because I'm tired of people thinking they can come on my show and disrespect me in my own house. Eastwood chuckled, a sound devoid of any warmth. Your house? This is television, Whoopi, not your personal kingdom. These cameras belong to the network. That audience came to see a show, not your personal therapy session. Therapy session. Whoopi's voice cracked with disbelief. You think calling out hypocrisy is therapy? You think holding people accountable is some kind of personal issue? I think, Eastwood said, standing up straighter and looking down at her with those legendary steely eyes. That you've confused accountability with bullying. I think you've confused passion with hostility. And I think you've forgotten the difference between being a host and being a prosecutor. The studio audience was now murmuring among themselves, sensing that this confrontation was spiraling beyond anything they had ever witnessed on daytime television. Security personnel had quietly moved closer to the set, though neither combatant seemed to notice or care. Whoopi walked around the desk, closing the distance between them. You want to know what I think? I think you're scared. I think you're scared of a world where people like me get to ask the hard questions. I think you're scared of being held accountable for the things you say and the influence you have. Eastwood didn't back down an inch. Scared? Lady, I've been making movies since before you knew what a camera was. I've been standing up for what I believe in longer than you've been in show business. The only thing I'm scared of is the damage people like you do when you mistake self-righteousness for wisdom. People like me? Whoopi's voice rose to a near shout. What exactly do you mean by people like me, Clint? Are you going to tell me what you really think about people like me? Eastwood's jaw tightened. I mean people who think that being loud makes them right. I mean people who think that attacking others makes them virtuous. I mean people who have forgotten that conversation requires listening, not just talking. Don't you dare try to twist this around. Whoopi shot back. Don't. You dare try to make this about my communication style when you're the one who came in here with an attitude. You're the one who walked into my studio thinking you could intimidate me with your reputation. Intimidate you. Eastwood's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone cold as winter. Whoopi, if I wanted to intimidate you, you'd know it. What I wanted was to have a civilized conversation about my work. What I got was an ambush from someone who's more interested in creating drama than creating dialogue. The producer in the wings was making frantic cutting motions, but the cameras kept rolling. This was television gold, and everyone in the studio knew it. The other co-hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to intervene or simply stay out of the crossfire. Whoopi took another step closer, her voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You know what your real problem is, Clint? Your real problem is that you can't handle being challenged by someone who isn't afraid of you. You can't handle being in a room where your reputation doesn't automatically make you right. Eastwood's response was immediate and devastating. My real problem, Whoopi, is that I foolishly thought I was coming here to talk to a professional. Instead, I find myself dealing with someone who's so desperate to prove how tough she is that she's forgotten how to be human. The studio erupted in gasps and murmurs. This was beyond anything anyone had expected. Whoopi's face went through a series of expressions, from shock to fury to something approaching dangerous calm. Forgotten how to be human? She repeated slowly. Did you just question my humanity on national television? Eastwood didn't flinch. I questioned your professionalism. I questioned your judgment. I questioned your ability to conduct an interview without turning it into a personal attack. If you want to interpret that as something else, that's your choice. My choice. Whoopi laughed bitterly. My choice is to not sit here and let you insult me and my show and my audience. My choice is to call you out for exactly what you are. And what am I, Whoopi? Please, enlighten us all. Whoopi's eyes blazed with fury. You're a relic. You're a dinosaur from an era when people could say whatever they wanted without consequences. You're someone who thinks that making westerns and war movies makes you an expert on real life. Eastwood's voice remained level, but something dangerous flickered in his expression. And you're someone who thinks that having a talk show makes you qualified to judge everyone else's character. You're someone who's so convinced of your own moral superiority that you can't see how badly you're embarrassing yourself right now. The tension in the studio had reached a breaking point. Camera operators were adjusting their shots to capture every moment of this unprecedented confrontation. The audience sat in stunned silence, witnessing the complete breakdown of what should have been a routine celebrity interview. Whoopi's voice rose to a shout that could be heard throughout the building. Embarrassing myself? I'm embarrassing myself? You're the one who came onto my show and started insulting me from the moment you sat down. You're the one who thinks you can waltz in here and treat me like some kind of servant. Servant. Eastwood's eyebrows rose. Whoopi, I've treated you with more respect than you've shown me since I walked through that door. The only person who's been insulting anyone here is you. Respect. Whoopi's voice cracked with disbelief. You call questioning my professionalism respect? You call telling me I've forgotten how to be human respect. Eastwood stepped closer, his presence commanding despite his age. I call telling the truth respect. I call refusing to pretend that your behavior is acceptable respect. I call standing up to a bully respect. The word bully hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Whoopi's face went through a series of expressions before settling on something approaching pure rage. The word bully reverberated through the studio like a thunderclap. Whoopi Goldberg's face transformed from anger to something far more dangerous, a cold fury that made everyone in the room take an involuntary step back. The cameras captured every micro-expression as she processed what Clint Eastwood had just called her on national television. A bully, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper, but somehow more menacing than any shout. Did you just call me a bully? On my own show? In front of my audience? Eastwood stood his ground, his weathered face set in stone. If the shoe fits, Whoopi, you've spent the last 20 minutes trying to humiliate me instead of having a conversation. You've attacked my character, my career, and my right to have an opinion. What would you call that? I'd call it holding you accountable. Whoopi shot back, her voice rising again. I'd call it asking the questions that need to be asked. I'd call it doing my job, which is something you clearly don't understand. Your job, Eastwood replied with devastating calm, is to interview guests, not to put them on trial. Your job is to inform your audience, not to use them as witnesses to your personal vendettas. The other co-hosts exchanged panicked glances. One of them tried again to intervene. Maybe we should all just take a breath and stay out of this. Whoopi snapped without looking away from Eastwood. This is between me and him. This is about respect, and this is about someone thinking they can come into my house and disrespect me. Eastwood's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone arctic cold. The only disrespect I see here is coming from the person who's supposed to be hosting this show. The only person who's forgotten their place is the one screaming at their guest. Forgotten my place. Whoopi's voice cracked with indignation. My place is right here, behind this desk, asking the questions that make people uncomfortable. My place is holding people like you responsible for the things you say and do. People like me, Eastwood repeated slowly. There's that phrase again. You keep saying people like me as if you know who I am based on some preconceived notion you've built up in your head. Whoopi moved closer, her finger now pointing directly at his chest. I know exactly who you are. You're someone who thinks his fame protects him from criticism. You're someone who thinks he can say whatever he wants without consequences. You're someone who represents everything that's wrong with this industry. Eastwood looked down at her finger, then back at her face. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades in Hollywood. And you're someone who's so desperate to be relevant that you'll attack a guest to create headlines. You're someone who's confused being controversial with being important. The studio audience gasped. Several people in the front row leaned forward, sensing that this confrontation was about to reach its climax. Security personnel had moved even closer, though both combatants seemed oblivious to everything except each other. Desperate to be relevant? Whoopi's voice rose to a near shriek. I've been relevant longer than you've been making your little cowboy movies. I've been fighting for what's right while you've been playing pretend on movie sets. Eastwood's response was swift and brutal. You've been fighting, all right. Fighting with anyone who dares to disagree with you. Fighting with guests who don't kiss your ring. Fighting with reality itself when it doesn't match your worldview. How dare you? Whoopi whispered, her voice trembling with rage. How dare you question my integrity? How dare you question my commitment to justice? Justice? Eastwood laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. Whoopi, the only justice you're interested in is the kind that makes you feel superior to everyone else. The only commitment you've shown today is a commitment to making yourself look foolish. That was the final straw. Whoopi's composure, what little remained of it, shattered completely. Get out, she said quietly. What? I said get out, Whoopi repeated, her voice growing stronger. Get out of my studio. Get out of my show. You want to insult me? You want to question my professionalism? You can do it from the parking lot. Eastwood raised an eyebrow. You're kicking me off the show? For what? For defending myself against your attacks. I'm kicking you off for being disrespectful, Whoopi declared, her voice now carrying to every corner of the studio. I'm kicking you off for coming into my house and treating me like garbage. I'm kicking you off because this is my show, and I don't have to tolerate this kind of behavior from anyone. The studio erupted in shocked murmurs. The other co-hosts sat frozen, unsure whether to support Whoopi or try to salvage what remained of the interview. The audience was witnessing television history, and they knew it. Eastwood stood perfectly still for a moment, studying Whoopi's face with those legendary steel blue eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried to every microphone in the building. You know what, Whoopi? You're absolutely right. This is your show, and you've just shown everyone exactly what kind of show it really is. He turned toward the exit, then paused and looked back at her. You've also shown them exactly what kind of person you really are. I hope they were paying attention. Security, Whoopi called out, her voice echoing through the studio. Please escort Mr. Eastwood off the premises. Two security guards approached hesitantly. Eastwood held up a hand. That won't be necessary. I can find my own way out. I've been finding my way out of hostile situations for longer than some of you have been alive. He began walking toward the exit, his stride confident and unhurried. Whoopi wasn't finished. That's right, walk away. Walk away like you always do when someone calls you on your behavior. Eastwood stopped and turned around one final time. Whoopi, I'm not walking away from a fight. I'm walking away from a tantrum. There's a significant difference, though I'm not sure you're capable of understanding it. Don't you dare lecture me about understanding, Whoopi shouted after him. Don't you dare try to make this about my character when you're the one who came in here looking for trouble. Eastwood's final words were delivered with the precision of a master craftsman. I came here to talk about my work. You turned it into something else entirely. The audience saw what happened here today. They can decide for themselves who was looking for trouble. With that, he walked off the set, leaving behind a studio in chaos and a host who was still shouting at his retreating figure. The cameras captured every moment as Whoopi turned back to face the audience, her chest heaving with exertion and rage. Well, she said, trying to regain some composure but failing completely. I guess that shows you what happens when people think they can come onto this show and disrespect me. This is The View, and we don't tolerate that kind of behavior from anyone, no matter how famous they think they are. The audience sat in stunned silence. The other co-hosts looked shell-shocked. The producers in the booth were frantically trying to figure out how to salvage what remained of the show. But the damage was done. In the span of 30 minutes, television history had been made as the show cut to commercial break. Whoopi remained standing behind her desk, still shaking with anger, still trying to process what had just happened. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. She had kicked Clint Eastwood off her show. But as the reality of the situation began to sink in, she began to realize that her victory might have come at a cost she hadn't anticipated. The cameras had captured everything, every insult, every attack, every moment of the confrontation that had spiraled completely out of control. And now, millions of viewers had witnessed not just the interview that went wrong, but the moment when a legendary Hollywood icon walked away from one of daytime television's biggest stages. What started as a routine promotional appearance had become something else entirely, something that would be talked about, analyzed, and debated for years to come. And at the center of it all was the question that would haunt everyone who witnessed it. Did Whoopi Goldberg go too far, or was Clint Eastwood really the problem? That's a story that will keep people talking long after the credits roll. What do you think really caused this explosive confrontation? Was Whoopi justified in kicking Clint off the show, or did she let her emotions get the better of her? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more incredible stories like this one. The truth behind celebrity. Confrontations is always more complex than it appears, and this one will have you questioning everything you thought you knew about both of these iconic figures.